Clarissa Morgan lived on the 14th floor of a tall, fancy building in Manhattan. The place had marble floors, gold handles on the doors, and a soft, warm smell in the hallways that reminded people of clean clothes and fresh flowers. Everything was just the way she liked it. Perfect, polished, and expensive. Clarissa liked to think of herself as a woman of taste. She wore the finest clothes, carried handbags that cost more than most people's rent, and never left the house without. Her hair and makeup done. Her life was built around status, people, places, and things that showed she was successful. She worked in fashion, managing brand deals for influencers. Her social media was filled with smiling pictures, sunny vacations, and perfectly arranged coffee cups. But there was one part of her daily life that never seemed to fit her world: the doorman at her building. His name was Harold Jenkins. He was tall, quiet, and always in a clean gray uniform. He opened the door every morning and nodded, politely, standing straight with his hands folded in front of him. Clarissa never really looked at him. Not truly. To her, he was just there. Someone she passed by every morning on her way to yoga or brunch. In the beginning, she simply ignored him. But as months turned into years, she began to speak to him, with a tone that was sharp and cold. If Harold didn't open the door quickly enough, she rolled her eyes. If he said good morning, she would sometimes sigh loudly or mumble something under her breath. Sometimes when she was with friends, she even made small jokes about him. "I don't know what they're paying him for," she once said while Harold stood only a few steps away. "He just stands there all day doing nothing." Harold heard it, but he didn't flinch. He simply turned back toward the door and continued with his work. He always did. The other doormen and residents noticed Clarissa's behavior. Some of the staff exchanged quiet looks when she passed by. Others simply shook their heads. No one wanted to say anything out loud. After all, Clarissa was rich, powerful, and quick to complain to management. One evening, Harold helped an elderly woman carry her groceries inside. Clarissa happened to be walking through the lobby at the same time. Instead of thanking him for helping a neighbor, she muttered, "Took you long enough." It didn't matter how polite Harold was. Clarissa treated him like someone who didn't belong in her world. She never thought about his life, his background, or his story. She never asked about his family. To her, Harold was just the black doorman, the man who stood at the entrance of her building, invisible until she needed the door opened. Sometimes when she had packages, she would shout from across the lobby, "Put it in front of my door, and don't be late this time." She never said please. She never said thank you. Harold responded the same way every time, with quiet dignity. He nodded, took care of her requests, and never talked back. He wasn't just being polite. He understood something that Clarissa did not. He knew that kindness is a choice, and it doesn't depend on how others treat you. It comes from within. What Clarissa didn't see, what she never stopped to notice, was that Harold was respected by almost everyone else in the building. He remembered people's names, held umbrellas, over elderly residents when it rained, and always smiled at the children. He greeted delivery drivers by name and made sure lost mail was returned quickly. Sometimes, when a child dropped a toy or a resident forgot their umbrella, Harold quietly fixed the problem without needing to be asked. He was one of those people who noticed everything but said very little. It was just the way he was, calm, patient, and always watching out for others. But Clarissa, she only saw what she wanted to see. She saw a uniform. She saw someone who didn't make the kind of money she did, someone who didn't go to the same restaurants, or wear designer shoes, or fly to Europe in the summer. And because of that, she thought she was better. Her attitude didn't stop at Harold. She often spoke to waiters, store clerks, and drivers in the same cold, impatient tone. She believed that power came from being louder, sharper, and quicker than everyone else. But what she didn't realize was that real strength is often quiet. It's steady. It doesn't need to prove itself. And Harold? He just kept doing his job. Morning after morning, night after night, he stood at that door with quiet pride. He wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't looking for praise. He had seen many people like Clarissa before. He had learned not to let their words change who he was. Clarissa never asked why Harold walked with a slight limp on cold mornings. She never noticed the old photo in his locker, a black and white picture of him in a firefighter's uniform. She never knew that he had once risked his life to save others from burning buildings. She never knew the reason why he had taken a job as a doorman after years of service, because she never asked. She never cared. To Clarissa, Harold was just part of the background of her perfect, curated life. Like the chandelier in the lobby or the soft music in the elevator, always there, always silent, until one day everything changed, and in a moment of smoke and fear, Clarissa would come face to face with the truth. She would see that the man she had ignored, the man she had looked down on for years, was so much more than she had ever imagined. But that moment was still to come. For now, Clarissa continued to walk past Harold each morning, her high heels clicking on the marble floor, her chin held high, her heart closed. And Harold? He simply nodded, opened the door, and let her pass, like he always did. Harold Jenkins had always been a quiet man, but behind his calm face was a lifetime of stories that most people never asked about. Every morning he stood at the front of the apartment building wearing a clean gray uniform, greeting residents. With a polite nod or a gentle smile, most people returned the greeting. Some even stopped for a quick chat. But no one really knew much about Harold, where he came from, what he used to do, or what he carried in his heart. The truth was, Harold hadn't always been a doorman. Years ago, he had been a firefighter in Queens. Back then, his uniform had been heavy with protective gear, and instead of standing in front of fancy buildings, he had rushed into homes filled with smoke. He had worked long shifts, sometimes overnight, and he had been trained to stay calm no matter how bad the situation looked. People who worked with Harold at the fire station remembered him as someone you could trust with your life. He didn't talk a lot, but when he gave instructions, others listened. He had a strong presence, not loud but steady, like a quiet engine that kept moving forward even when everything else seemed to fall apart. One winter night many years ago, there had been a large fire in an old apartment building. It was freezing cold, and the flames had spread quickly through the upper floors. People were screaming for help, and smoke filled the stairways. That night, Harold had run back inside the building more times than anyone could count. He carried a young girl out on his back. He helped an older man who couldn't walk find his way down a broken staircase. By the time it was over, the fire was out, the building was saved, and no lives were lost. But Harold had been hurt. His back had taken a serious hit from falling debris. For weeks, he couldn't walk without pain. Doctors told him he had to stop firefighting. It wasn't safe for him anymore. It was a hard truth to accept. Harold had spent most of his adult life helping others. Walking away from that part of himself felt like losing something important. But he didn't argue. He just nodded, thanked the doctor, and started to rebuild his life. He didn't want to sit at home doing nothing. So when someone mentioned an opening as a doorman at a luxury building in Manhattan, Harold applied. It was different, yes. It was quiet and calm, but in a way, it still allowed him to do what he loved most: keep people safe. Working as a doorman didn't seem like much to outsiders, but Harold saw everything. He watched who came in and out. He noticed when people looked worried, tired, or upset. He helped carry heavy bags for the elderly. He made sure strangers didn't slip into the building unnoticed. When it rained, he handed out umbrellas. When someone forgot their keys, he found ways to help them feel less embarrassed. He was always there, always watching. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need people to know about his past. In fact, very few people in the building ever asked. Some of the other doormen knew a little bit more. They had seen the photo in his locker, a younger Harold wearing his old firefighter helmet, smiling proudly beside his team. They had seen the medal tucked away in the corner of his drawer, awarded for bravery. But Harold never mentioned it. He believed that helping others shouldn't be done for applause. It should be done because it's the right thing to do. Still, it stung sometimes when people like Clarissa treated him as if he were invisible. Harold noticed her sharp words, the E, way she tossed instructions without making eye contact. He never responded with anything but kindness, but he wasn't made of stone. It hurt sometimes, not because he needed her to like him, but because he hoped people would learn to see more than just a uniform. There were others in the building who treated him well. Mrs. Green on the 7th floor always brought him a cup of tea in the morning. Mr. Patel from 9B once gave him a scarf during a snowy week. A little boy named Leo always waved excitedly and told Harold about his day at school. These small acts of kindness made the hard moments easier. Harold found joy in small things. The sound of birds early in the morning, the warmth of sunlight through the glass lobby windows, the smell of fresh bagels when a delivery arrived. He liked to read old mystery novels on his break and kept a notebook where he wrote short thoughts and memories. Sometimes he wrote down funny moments he saw during the day, like a dog chasing its own tail or a toddler trying to carry a balloon twice her size. Even though his life was simple now, Harold didn't feel small. He knew that real strength didn't come from shouting or showing off. It came from being steady when others weren't, from helping even when no one was watching, from staying kind even when kindness wasn't returned. Harold had once seen people at their worst, in fear, in panic, in pain. He had also seen them at their best, when neighbors helped one another, when strangers risked their safety to pull someone from danger. Those memories stayed with him. They shaped the way he moved through life. That's why, even when Clarissa rolled her eyes or whispered about him to her friends, Harold never responded with anger. He knew that people sometimes acted out of their own pain. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe she had grown up thinking that power meant treating others like they were less. Whatever the reason, Harold didn't let her words sink into his heart. He simply kept showing up, day after day, opening the door, watching over the building, waiting. And though Clarissa had no idea, her life was more protected than she knew, because someone like Harold was always paying attention. He noticed when her son was late coming home from school. He noticed when the delivery man looked confused and guided him gently. He even once caught a package thief before they could get away with residents' mail. Harold wasn't just a doorman. He was a quiet guardian. The kind of person you didn't realize mattered, until the moment you truly needed someone to be there. And that moment was coming. It would arrive in a way that no one expected, fast, sudden, and unforgettable. And when it did, everything would change, not just for Clarissa, but for everyone in the building. But for now, Harold stood quietly at his post, hands folded in front of him, eyes calm, just watching, just waiting, because that's what real heroes do. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that felt slow and peaceful. The sky was bright and the sun gave the streets a golden glow. People were outside walking their dogs, sipping iced coffee, or enjoying a little break from their busy lives. The front of the apartment building was calm, and inside the lobby the air felt cool and still. Harold stood at his usual spot, quietly watching the street through the glass doors. Clarissa had just come downstairs with her son Oliver. He was 7 years old, full of energy, and always asking questions. Dressed in a little blue hoodie and sneakers with lights on the sides, he held his toy car in one hand and his favorite stuffed dog in the other. Clarissa was on her phone, scrolling through photos and checking messages. She barely looked up as Oliver skipped beside her. They stepped outside for just a few minutes. Clarissa was planning to meet a neighbor and talk about an upcoming school event. Her car, a large black SUV, was parked just across the street. Oliver tugged at her arm and pointed toward it. "Mom, can I sit in the car while you talk?" he asked. Clarissa glanced at the car and then at her friend who had just come out of the next building. She waved, distracted. "Fine, but don't touch anything," she said, still looking at her phone. She pressed the remote to unlock the car. Oliver ran toward it happily, pulled the door open, and climbed into the back seat. He buckled himself in and began playing with his toy car, pretending it was racing around the seat. Clarissa crossed the sidewalk and stood with her friend, chatting about school papers, upcoming holidays, and their favorite online shops. Her voice rose with excitement as they laughed and shared weekend plans. She didn't notice anything unusual at first, but Harold, standing at his post, noticed something. It was a thin stream of gray smoke, almost like steam coming from under the car. He narrowed his eyes. At first he thought maybe it was dust or the sunlight playing tricks, but then he saw a flicker, just a tiny spark, near the edge of the vehicle close to the front wheel. He straightened up, alert now. His years of experience began to speak to him quietly in his mind. He had seen things like this before, years ago. A car that looked fine on the outside but had something wrong deep inside. The flicker turned into a soft glow. Smoke began to rise, more clearly now, and a faint smell, like something burning, began to float in the air. Harold pushed open the door of the building and stepped outside. At that exact moment, Clarissa was still deep in conversation. Oliver, inside the car, didn't see anything wrong. He was making zooming sounds with his toy, still buckled in, still safe for the moment. Harold walked faster, his heart starting to race. "Ma'am," he said, firmly but politely. Clarissa didn't hear him. Then the glow underneath the car grew stronger. The smoke turned darker. People walking down the street began to pause. A man pointed. A woman gasped. That's when Clarissa turned. She saw smoke now, real smoke, coming from the front of her car, and then in a flash she remembered. "Oliver!" she screamed. Her phone dropped from her hand. She ran toward the car, but her feet froze. The smoke was too thick. The door was shut. Oliver's face was suddenly there at the window, wide-eyed, confused, his hands pushing against the glass. "Mommy?" he called out. His voice was muffled by the door. Clarissa tried to pull the handle, but it was hot. She stepped back, unsure what to do, panic rising in her chest. People around her began to shout, but no one moved closer. And then Harold ran. He didn't think twice. In just a few seconds, he was at the car. He didn't pause. He didn't shout. He just acted. He pulled his jacket off and wrapped it around his hands. He yanked the door handle and pulled it open. Smoke poured out, swirling around him, making it hard to see. But he reached in. Inside, Oliver was coughing, scared, his toy car still clutched tightly. Harold leaned in and spoke gently, the way someone speaks when they're trying to calm a frightened child. "Come on, buddy, I've got you," he said. Oliver reached out and Harold lifted him from the seat. He held him close, shielding his head. With careful steps, he backed away from the car, still wrapped in smoke. As soon as they were a few feet away, the air cleared enough for Clarissa to run forward. She fell to her knees, reaching for her son. Oliver coughed and then buried, his face in her shoulder, holding on tightly. Harold stepped back, his face serious but calm. His hands were darkened slightly from the smoke. His shirt was wrinkled and his hair had bits of ash in it. But he was steady, just like always. A neighbor brought a bottle of water. Another called for emergency services. In just minutes, sirens were heard in the distance. Clarissa looked up at Harold, her eyes full of emotion, shock, fear, gratitude, and something else too. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Something like respect. For the first time in years, she saw him. Not as the doorman, not as someone standing quietly at the edge of her world, but as a person who had just saved her son's life. She stood up slowly, holding Oliver close. Her voice shook as she tried to speak. "Thank you," she said softly. Harold just nodded, like he always did. He didn't need a big moment. He didn't need a crowd to clap. He had done what needed to be done. That was enough. The fire truck arrived a few minutes later. The car was quickly surrounded and checked. It turned out there had been a problem. With the fuel line, something no one could have predicted. The firefighters praised Harold for his fast thinking. "You moved like one of us," one of them said with a grin. Harold smiled quietly. "Old habits," he replied. Clarissa sat on the curb, still holding Oliver, who was now resting against her. She looked up at the man she had mocked for years, the one she had ignored, spoken down to, and never truly seen. And for the first time, she wondered who he really was. That night, Clarissa couldn't sleep. The image of smoke rising from the car, her son trapped inside, and Harold pulling him out again and again played in her mind. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of Oliver, who had finally fallen asleep next to her, still holding his toy car. Her chest felt heavy, not just because of fear, but something else too. Something she didn't have a name for yet. She remembered how she used to treat Harold, how she would walk past him without a glance, speak to him without kindness, and even whisper unkind things about him to others in the building. He was just the doorman, she had told herself, nothing more. But today, that same man had run into smoke without hesitation to save her child. She sat up in bed and walked quietly into the kitchen. The apartment was quiet. Even the city sounds felt far away. She poured herself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the night lights glow. Her heart was still beating faster than usual. She thought about how Harold hadn't said much. No long speech, no look that said, "Now you owe me something." He had just nodded politely and stepped back. Like always, like it was just another part of his job. But it wasn't. Everyone had seen it. The neighbors, the firemen, the people who had gathered outside during the smoke. Harold had done something big, and he had done it with grace. The next morning, Clarissa woke up early. Oliver was still asleep, his arms curled around his pillow. She tiptoed into the hallway and opened her front door. The sun was just beginning to rise. The lobby was quiet. Harold was already at his post. He stood with his hands behind his back, dressed neatly in his usual uniform. He was reading the newspaper, his eyes scanning the headlines. He looked calm, as if the day before hadn't happened. Clarissa hesitated, then walked down to the lobby. She stood in front of Harold for a moment before she spoke. "Good morning," she said, her voice softer than usual. Harold looked up, folded his paper, and nodded politely. "Good morning, ma'am." There was a pause. Then she said, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did yesterday. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life." Harold gave a small smile. "I'm just glad your son is okay." She looked at him carefully. "You didn't even hesitate." "I've had some experience with these things," he said. His voice was calm, not boastful. "Long ago, I used to be a firefighter." Clarissa blinked. "Really?" Harold nodded. "Yes, for over 20 years. She didn't know what to say. She had spent years thinking Harold was just someone who opened doors. She never imagined that he had once saved lives for a living, that he had training, experience, and a quiet strength that came from more than just standing at a lobby desk. For the first time, she felt truly ashamed of how she had treated him. "I didn't know," she said. "I never asked." Harold shrugged, gently. "Most people don't." Clarissa looked down at the polished lobby floor. "Still, I was wrong about you." He didn't say anything right away. Then he said, "We all make mistakes." His words weren't sharp or cold. They were just honest. That made them hurt even more. Over the next few days, everything felt different. People in the building talked about what had happened. Some came up to Harold and thanked him. A few even brought him small gifts, cookies, tea, or handwritten notes. A little girl from the third floor gave him a drawing of him as a superhero. Harold smiled and thanked them all, but never made a big deal of it. He was the same as always. Quiet, calm, steady. Clarissa began to notice things she had never paid attention to before. She noticed how Harold helped a delivery man carry a heavy box up 4 flights of stairs when the elevator was out. She saw him kneel down to talk gently to a crying toddler while her mom searched her bag for keys. She watched as he waited outside for 10 minutes during a snowstorm, just to hold the door open for an elderly couple. And then one afternoon, as she walked through the lobby holding Oliver's hand, she paused. Harold opened the door for them, as usual, but this time Clarissa stopped. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, calling him by his name for the first time. "Would you like to come upstairs sometime this week? I'd like to cook dinner for you, just a small thank you. Harold looked surprised for a moment. Then he gave a kind smile. That's very kind of you, ma'am, but not necessary. It is to me, she replied. And I'd like Oliver to learn something important about gratitude, about respect. Harold's smile widened just a little. In that case, I'd be honored. That evening, Clarissa went to the grocery store and picked out ingredients with extra care. She didn't consider herself a great cook, but she wanted the meal to be warm and full of heart. Something that said thank you, without needing too many words. When Harold came up a few nights later, he was greeted by Oliver, who ran to the door with excitement. "Mr. Jenkins, you saved me," he said proudly. Harold chuckled and patted the boy's head. "I'm glad you're feeling better, young man." The dinner was simple: roasted vegetables, rice, and grilled chicken. But Harold said it was one of the nicest meals he had had in a long time. The three of them sat around the table, and for the first time Clarissa and Harold truly talked. He told her a few stories from his firefighter days, not to impress her, but to share. She listened, asking questions, amazed at how much one person could do in a lifetime, and how quietly they could carry it. She told him a little about her own life, too. About raising Oliver alone. About how sometimes stress made her impatient, made her build walls without meaning to. Harold nodded. He didn't judge. He just listened. When he left that evening, Oliver gave him a hug. Clarissa walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said again, but this time it meant even more. Harold nodded. "Take care." And with that, he returned to his post in the lobby. But things had changed. Clarissa now greeted him every day with a smile and his name. Others in the building who once walked past without a second thought began to follow her lead. Slowly, Harold became more than just the man at the door. People started seeing the real person standing behind the uniform, not because he saved a life, but because he had always been worth seeing. Seasons passed and life slowly returned to normal in the apartment building. The trees outside turned green, then golden, and soon winter returned once more. But something had changed, not just in the air, but in the hearts of the people who lived there. Especially in Clarissa. It had been months since the day Harold saved Oliver. And yet that memory remained clear in Clarissa's heart. Not because of the danger or the smoke, but because of what came afterward. How her thoughts, feelings, and even her behavior slowly shifted. Before, she used to walk past Harold with quick steps and hardly a glance. Now she always paused. She'd smile, ask how his day was going, sometimes even bring him a cup of coffee or a warm muffin from her kitchen. It wasn't just about being polite anymore. It was about recognizing someone she had once overlooked. But she wasn't the only one. Slowly, the entire building had begun to follow her lead. People started talking to Harold, not just with short greetings, but real conversations. They asked about his day, his thoughts, even his advice. One woman from the 8th floor gave him a small book of poems she thought he'd enjoy. A teenage boy who used to walk by with headphones now greeted him each morning with a cheerful, "Good day, sir." Even the building manager took notice and arranged for Harold's small desk to be upgraded. A proper chair, a new coat rack, and a better heater for the cold months. They even added his name, Mr. Harold Jenkins, Doorman, on a small golden plate next to the entrance. It was a small thing, but meaningful. One chilly morning, Clarissa came down to the lobby holding a plate covered in foil. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins," she said, placing it on his desk. "Banana bread, still warm." "You're spoiling me," Harold replied with a gentle smile. "You deserve it," she said honestly. Harold nodded and lifted the edge of the foil. The sweet smell of the bread filled the air. "Oliver helped me this time," she added proudly. Harold chuckled. "Well, in that case, I better eat it all." Clarissa stood there for a moment, watching him. Then she said, "You know, I've been thinking, you never told me why you became a doorman. After all those years as a firefighter, you could have done many things. Harold leaned back slightly, looking thoughtful. I suppose I wanted something quieter, he said. Something where I could still be helpful. I've always liked looking after people, even in small ways. Clarissa nodded. You do more than just look after people. You remind us what it means to care. Without saying much, you've taught us all something. Harold smiled again, but didn't say anything more. That was his way. Simple. Steady. One afternoon, Oliver came home from school with a big sheet of paper. He held it up proudly for his mother to see. It's for the Community Heroes Project, he said. Everyone had to draw someone who helps people. On the paper was a crayon drawing of Harold, tall with a hat and a big smile, standing in front of the apartment doors. There was even a little drawing of Oliver beside him, holding his hand. I want to show him, Oliver said. Clarissa smiled. Of course. They went down to the lobby and Oliver ran to Harold, waving the drawing. This is you, he said excitedly. You're my hero. Harold took the paper gently and looked at it for a long moment. He didn't say much, but his eyes softened. I'm honored, he said. From that day on, the drawing stayed on the wall behind Harold's desk. Everyone who passed by noticed it. Some even stopped to admire it. It wasn't fancy or perfect, but it spoke louder than any framed award. Weeks turned into months. One snowy day, the building held a small gathering in the lobby to thank Harold for his years of service. Clarissa helped plan it. There was hot cocoa, cookies, and a big card that everyone had signed. The children made decorations, and someone even played music softly from a speaker. Harold didn't expect any of it. When he walked into the lobby and saw everyone waiting for him, he paused in surprise. A neighbor stepped forward and said, Mr. Jenkins, you've been here for years, and you've done more than your job. You've been part of our lives. Thank you. Clarissa handed him the card. Oliver gave him a hug. Everyone clapped, not loudly, but warmly, the kind of clapping that came from the heart. Harold didn't give a big speech. He simply said, Thank you all. This means more to me than you know. Later that evening, Clarissa sat with Oliver in the living room. Do you remember how I used to act toward Mr. Jenkins? She asked gently. Oliver nodded. You didn't smile at him much. No, she said quietly. I didn't treat him kindly. I judged him without knowing him. But I learned something, that everyone has a story, and everyone deserves kindness. Oliver nodded again. I like him. He's really good. Yes, he is. As spring returned once more, life continued at its usual pace. People came and went, new families moved in. But the spirit inside the building had changed. It felt warmer, more connected, and Harold, standing by the door, still smiled at everyone, still held the door open, still remembered birthdays and asked about people's pets. But now, he wasn't invisible anymore. He was part of the family that lived within those walls. Clarissa, once too proud to say hello, had grown in a quiet, beautiful way. She still had her busy days and stressful moments, but she never forgot the lesson that Harold had taught her, not through lectures or advice, but through his actions. She had learned that respect isn't about status, that real strength is often quiet, and that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who teach us the most important lessons in life. And Harold? He never asked for anything in return, but he got something greater than praise or gifts. He got the respect, trust, and love of a community who finally saw him for who he truly was. Not just the doorman, but a kind, brave, and good man who had been a hero all along.